Welcome. Happy Friday, everyone. As we typically do, we're just giving it a moment or two for individuals to get settled into our virtual learning space. So if you're just connecting with us, sit back and be prepared for an hour of great and rich engagement. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant of NWC. And I want to shout out the NWC team. We worked tirelessly, and we have for the past 5 years to bring this virtual learning experience to the broader community. And we're so glad that you have decided to join us today. We do not take that lightly at all. If you're just tuning in, then I invite you to go to the chat or to the comment section of LinkedIn Live. We do have an audience there as well. And let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. It is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented. And we are so grateful that we have people from all over the United States and even from outside of the United States that will join us each week just to be a part of our podcast community. I also want you to know that at NWC, we really value disability inclusion. So with that in mind, we do have closed caption that has been enabled for those who could benefit from it. So I hope that you will take advantage of that. I also want you to know that at NWC, we really do value community. And so as you're connected with us today, make sure that if you're hearing something that resonates, go to the chat, let us know your sentiments, use those reactions, those emojis, anything that can help us know that you're tracking with us and that this time is very valuable in terms of what you are hearing and processing. I also want you to know that if you're part of the Zoom community, then we do welcome cameras. We love smiling faces. We also are keenly aware that sometimes people are joining us in a capacity where maybe they're multitasking. And in whatever way that you're here today, we are grateful. Welcome again. If you're just checking in, this is Intentional Conversations podcast, and we're about to let the conversations begin. Enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we're about to do. If you're just tuning in, again, Dr. Nika White here for Intentional Conversations podcast. And as you see on the screen, this is a special year for us. We are in our 5th year of providing this virtual learning experience, and we could not be more proud to have you as part of our community. And so we hope that you will stay tuned because we have a lot of great and exciting opportunities that we're leaning into this year as it relates to our vodcast. And I will speak to that in a little bit. But for now, just know that we are yay 5, and we're super happy about it. I also want to mention that January is National Mentoring Month. And so if that's something that you are not aware of, I want you to know to make sure you're leaning into learning all about how you can get involved in this very selfless way of adding value to someone else's life. I know that I really have benefited from mentor relationships, and I want you to also have the value of being able to do the same. So we lift as we climb, and mentoring is a great way to do that. And at NWC, we love to take advantage of opportunities to highlight national observances. And so certainly want to make sure I put that into your hearing. We also are finding ourselves at the time of year where we stop and we reflect and we think on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So Monday, January 20th, is the time that many people will be stepping aside to reflect, to do some volunteer service, to really try to give back in meaningful ways so that we can uplift all communities in the legacy of Dr. King, the way that he did, and his service to all. And so super excited about ways in which our community will show up for each other during this MLK Day celebration tomorrow. Now, many of you who've been a part of our community, you know that I have a book that's entitled Inclusion Uncomplicated. This month marks the 2nd year anniversary. That is in partnership with Forbes Books. And this month, we also released a paperback version. So I want to make sure that you are aware of that. I hope that you will take advantage to get a copy, maybe gift a copy, bring some kind of talks and learning experiences to your organization. We'd love to hear from you. And again, those Amazon reviews are so appreciated and very much needed. And all authors will tell you that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now at NWC, we're excited because 2025 means that there are also new opportunities for new program and service offerings. And one of which that I'm super excited about is a program called Boundless. This is a women's community where we're focused very much on well-being, empowerment, and leadership. and safety and protections. And so we want to make sure that you have information regarding this opportunity, how you can bring it to a community of learners that you are connected with, or even to an organization. And so we're going to drop a link into the chat, and I hope that you will reach out to learn more. Another service offering is storytelling cultural framework. I deeply believe that storytelling is a tremendous way of connecting us, of bridging the divide that sometimes can exist. When we share stories and personal narratives, we are getting proximate to someone's lived experience. We are letting the vulnerability of the moment to allow us to build empathy and compassion. And through that, we are sensitizing our way of helping to show up for people so they can be at their best and have a strong sense of belonging. And I want to bring this cultural framework of storytelling to your organization. So again, if this is something that is piquing your interest, please go to the chat where we have placed a link to more information about this storytelling cultural framework, which includes methodology. It includes some consultative design of how to build that into your organization's DNA, as well as learning experiences across all levels of the organization. I look forward to having this conversation with you. Now, I get to the point where I would let you know about some of the upcoming guest co-hosts we have on Intentional Conversations podcast. And on next Friday, January 24th, I'm excited to welcome Zachary Nunn. If you don't know him, look him up. Zachary is going to be joining us to discuss the future of work and building employee and customer experiences with data. So I really look forward to that conversation with Zachary. And I hope that you will be here with us as well. Ending the month, we have on January 31st, my friend Audrey Lee, and she is going to also share her rich experience in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, HR. And so I hope that you will join me also for the last intentional conversations of the month on the 31st. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is a special year because it's our 5th year anniversary. So we're doing something really special. In addition to every Friday bringing you a new episode, we are also quarterly doing what we are referring to as the Intentional Conversations Viewed episode. And that is when we're going to bring in a panel of some of our past hosts and just be in conversation around what's going on since the last time we've brought them onto the show. There's lots of other content areas that we're going to bring in, moments of surprises, but I hope that you will join us because this is going to take place, the first one, on Monday, February 24th from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will drop the link into the chat, and I really hope that you will save this date, that you will share it out with others. We have none other than Minda Hartz, Tara J. Frank, Deepa Purushothaman, and Ritu Bison, which I am so excited because these are not only just practitioners in this space that are amazing, they are my friends, they are my sisters. We're in a brain trust group together. And I can tell you that you do not want to miss this date for Intentional Conversations reunion episode as we again celebrate being B.R.A.V.E. this year. Okay, so we're at the point and the moment of time where I have the privilege of being able to formally introduce my guest co-host for today's Intentional Conversation podcast. And by the way, we do take the audio and extract it and make it available in a podcast capacity. So for those of you who like to get your content in podcasts, then you can do so as well after today. But I always take a moment to formally introduce our guest co-host by reading their credentials, their accolades, their bio, because it's important to me for our community to know how our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation. So today will be no different, and I am delighted to welcome Jelisa Dallas. And Jelisa Dallas is a distinguished speaker, 3 times published author, and esteemed coach, consultant, higher education professional, and mental health advocate. As the visionary CEO of B.R.A.V.E Coaching and Consulting, her mission is to equip individuals and organizations with the emotional intelligence needed to break barriers, bolster belief, and build behaviors that optimize life for true belonging. With over 14 years in education, Jelisa has developed resilience programming for nonprofit organizations, historically underrepresented communities, and various educational institutions within the private and public sectors. She holds a Master of Science in Educational Leadership from Old Dominion University and certifications in DEI workplace training from USF Muma College of Business and mental health first aid from the National Council of Mental Wellbeing. Jelisa passionately believes in nurturing the soul, mind, will, and emotions, I love that, to foster authenticity, advocacy, and appreciation. Her goal is to guide individuals and organizations toward living bravely, hence the Go Brave coaching and consulting. I am so excited to welcome Jelisa today, and I hope that you are too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you, podcast community, to find those emojis, those words of affirmation, whatever expression that you can think of, to let Jelisa know how grateful we are to have her here today. And I'm adding her to the spotlight. And as you are finding your way of showing gratitude to our guest co-host today, I just want to say that, Jelisa, we do have a tradition here. And our tradition is to ask that our guest co host, as they're greeting our audience, to share something with us that we would not know from reading and hearing bio, which we've just done. And so, since we're really into this mode of storytelling, we often like to invite people to maybe share a story that just helps us to deepen our understanding of who you are beyond what we may be able to read and see on paper. So, thank you for being here. And I want to turn the floor over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be here, be amongst this phenomenal community that you have created. And I would say something that you would not find on my bio or anything is that I love to dance. Like the dancing woman emoji is just my thing. I try to place it in every
That's
conversation
your
I have
go-to.
with people. And I mean, when I need a break from being at my computer all day, you will find me dancing. I don't know if you noticed, but I was dancing during the intro, just a little
Please do.
shoulder, movement here and there. And it just so happened I found out from my mom a couple years ago that I have Ethiopian heritage. And from that,
Oh,
there's a dance called the Eskida, I think I'm pronouncing it. It's like
mhm.
dancing shoulders. I'm like, I always wondered why my shoulders were always like
Really?
moving.
I am
Yeah.
learning
And
something new. I love that. Well, I need to go and
so
chase now my lineage because, yeah, I mean, I don't know if y'all caught it, but yeah, maybe it's the excitement because we have a new video for 2025, which again, kudos to our amazing, amazing, amazing marketing team. I want to shout out Peculiar. But the video is lovely, so I always dance to it as well. And so y'all caught that, but I did. But I love that. I never heard that. Okay, fantastic. That is lovely. Well, we're so glad you're here. I want to jump right in so that we can maximize our time and really hear all of the great nuggets that you have to share related to your experience. I'm going to first just talk about, courageous leadership because you have very intentionally centered your work, your consultancy, your expertise around this notion of being brave and showing up brave. And so courageous leadership has a very unique meaning for you. And I want us to just have the knowledge and the benefit of understanding, how do you, Jelisa, define courageous leadership? What does it mean to you? And why is it vital in today's world?
for sure. Courageous leadership, it can mean so much to so many people, but of course, for myself, it's a mixture or a culmination of three things. As you mentioned in my bio, that soul work is a part of that process. Really understanding who we are, how we show up in the world, looking at our mind, our will, and our emotions to really navigate this space of being a human being. So embracing that journey. Second to that is developing emotional intelligence. A lot of times when we are kind of stagnant and stuck, we're like, okay, what is it that's going on in my life that's preventing my forward movement? And a lot of times it first has to deal with us. What
Right.
haven't we confronted to get us from where we are to where we need to be? But also, how do we connect and involve ourselves with people so that we can have a level of empathy to move in life well together with others? And then lastly, it's that having that readiness for change, being able to be intentional with, as you mentioned, our vulnerability, our value, our virtues, our voice, and then emulating what it looks like to align our beliefs with our behaviors. And I know that probably was a lot when you're thinking about courageous leadership, but those three components, that soul work, emotional intelligence, and then that just natural gravitation from living, loving, and then leading courageously. And
I love that.
what that means, I think, in the world, especially with everything that's going on, it's just a lot. It helps us to be a little bit more. I don't want to use the word confident because I feel like sometimes confidence is overrated because it requires a little bit more experience than maybe some people have, a knowledge base that people need. But I would say courageous in that there is a lot of fear going on, uncertainty,
Right.
in the
Absolutely.
world that we're living in. And it's so necessary in this world to move courageously. And that's us taking risks, moving forward, doing it
Absolutely.
afraid.
Yeah, doing it afraid, moving forward, being grounded in the work is what Toki says. And so, no, I appreciate the in-depth definition of how in which you are helping us to unpack and understand all that courageous leadership requires because it is multidimensional, it is multi-layered, right? And I love when you said we need to make sure that we're moving in life well, not only for ourselves, but also moving in life well with others.
Yeah.
And what I heard was that in order to show up in a way where we are really centering and being intentional about courageous leadership, it requires us to get to know ourselves as well. You talked about confronting maybe the stuff in our past, and sometimes we don't want to do that because it could be painful. But I think that's also a part of the healing process. And once we are healed, that level of bravery and showing up to where we can be courageous and then help others to show up the same way is really powerful. So I love the lengthy nature in which you have defined courageous leadership. So no apologies needed there at all. And you also alluded to this, but I want to dig deeper because I think this is really important. Courageous leadership is also about knowing oneself as it relates to your values. So that's where I want to go next. And I want to talk about how does living in alignment with one's values fuel courageous actions, fuel bravery in terms of how we show up in our leadership abilities.
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of times as we are into this new year, we're talking about vision and we're talking about making goals. But I think a missing factor to that is aligning our values and the necessity of having values that work with the vision that we're putting out into the world. And granted, in probably the larger organizations and businesses, they do have values, but how does that meet our individual values? Because when we show up in the workplace, that needs to be in alignment, or else we're going to be
Right.
very frustrated with where we are. And
100%.
so it's so necessary in leadership that we are connected, and not just a cerebral type of, these are my values, but how are we connected in our body, and as I mentioned, in our soul, like our mind, will, and
Mm-hmm.
emotions, and essentially in our spirit, like what is really driving our momentum. And values are imperative because it's kind of like a filtration system in how we make decisions and how we clarify our intentions and how we are essentially showing up in the world and leading with authenticity. If we don't
Mm.
have values, you can kind of see it when people are kind of like frantic, a little all over the place, because they have nothing that they're rooted in. And so when it comes to leadership, values are necessary to really bring that seamless alignment between who we are, how we show up in the world, and then how we do life with others.
Yeah. So what's coming up for me, Jelisa, and you touched on this briefly, is when I think about the state that we're in right now, the climate we're in at the start of this new year, where next week some really significant things are going to take place in our country, right? And we're going to start to see how that new leadership, that new administration in our country is going to implement his values, his beliefs, and how that may impact, critical masses of people. And I just want to lean into that because I have heard, and I'm experiencing this myself, that there are a lot of leaders who care deeply about humanity, who care deeply about the sense of belonging and equity and inclusion, and really being able to care for the most marginalized in our community that are they're feeling a lot of trepidation about what's to come. And so I want to relate this. I'm going somewhere with this. I want to relate this to this notion of courageous leadership and being brave, because what you just talked about is that we have to deeply know ourselves, know our values, and align wherever we can, everything that we attach ourselves to with that. And there are also circumstances, Jaleesa, like what I just mentioned, where maybe we don't have that power and that ability to directly align unless we're going to move out of the country, or maybe unless from which we're going to change jobs. And granted, some people are so deeply rooted to being aligned with their values that they have decided to maybe shift from different organizations where they didn't see that there was an alignment. But I also want to acknowledge that that is not always feasible. It's not even always a reality. And so we have to navigate and we have to manage nonetheless. So, what do you say for those people who are like, I live in a country where my values are not aligned with the leadership of this country? What do you say for how do we? What are some tips for us to just settle ourselves, calm our nervous system, and try to settle in as best as we can, given the circumstances? A tough question, I know.
Yes. And I can only constantly say this and have to remind myself, the only thing that I'm an expert in is my own experience. So, and
Yeah,
sharing
good
from
point. Yes,
and
share from
sharing
your experience. Maybe you can inspire us. How are you doing this? How are you navigating this?
yes, and sharing, just from my own experience, I have a lesson that I teach in some of the workshops that I offer through my business, and looking at the difference between truth and fact. And a lot of times it can seem very synonymous; they are one and the same. But the way it has come up for me is facts are my reality, what I see every day, what's going on around me, and some of the things that I just cannot control, things that I just
Yeah,
have to fall in line with because that's just the reality of the situation. Whereas truth is really the revelation to that reality. So, in backtracking into, again, my lived experience, I was a divorcee. And at that time in my life, I didn't have employment, essentially didn't have a place to live. Just life seemed to really be lifing. And
yeah,
I was very just out of sorts. Even with all the credentials and all the things that seemed to be working for me, it didn't work for me at that time. But the truth of that reality is that I came to know myself in the deepest way because I
yeah.
wasn't relying on someone else to tell me who I was.
Yes,
I was
yes.
relying on myself and doing that soul work, that deep work. Now, granted, there's layers to that soul work, that deep work. And so, in thinking about how people are handling life right now, it is about discerning between the reality of our situations and then what's the truth? How
Hmm.
am I going to show up better? How am I going to be my authentic self? Now, in some places and spaces, that's not always a privilege that we have, but
Absolutely.
when I think about how I show up, you're gonna get me and all of me.
Mhm,
And if
mhm.
that requires me to shift my environment, being courageous enough to do
Yeah,
that. Because I
yeah.
believe our assignments are, if not anything else, gonna follow us, if not lead us to the next thing.
Yeah, no, that was so well spoken. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Jelisa. Okay, so I want to talk about your Go Brave framework. So let's tell us about the Go Brave framework and how it helps leaders to develop resilience and to inspire others.
Yes. Go Brave, it came to me because a lot of things, everything, let me just be fully transparent. Everything for me is rooted in faith. Um,
Yes,
and and
yes, I
and
as well. We share that. Absolutely, absolutely.
and so it honestly it came to me in prayer. And
Mhm.
it was almost audible, and I was like, "Go Brave." Now, typically because I'm a teacher, like, I wanna share it with people. I love education, like, "Let me share this with someone else," but I really resonated with the ideas, "That's for me first. Let me sit
Yeah.
with what it
Ah,
means to go
yeah.
brave." It was
Yeah.
a personal revelation for me that I needed to work through. And then eventually, as I'm experiencing today, it's a movement. So, with
Yeah.
that, Go Brave is first about growth and specifically growing your mindset. I love acronyms and alliteration, so follow me if you can.
Mhm.
So, growth. The second is optimism. I am very much an optimist. I will always look at something with hopefulness and great expectation. And so, if anyone works with us or does life with us as Go Brave, that is my hope for them as well. So, the GO, growth and optimism, B for boldness. I mean, I think that's a given when we're talking about being courageous, taking those risks. Resilience is at the core of that. So, as you bring up resilience in leadership, that's an inevitable, excuse me, part of going brave
Yeah.
is being resilient, having that bounce back, having that support system, which I believe Go Brave provides. Um, that authenticity. It is so imperative that we own who we are, operate in the authority in who we are, so that we can optimize our lives. And the V for Go Brave is twofold. It's both victory and virtue. I believe that I'm a
Mm,
conqueror of whatever it is that I set my mind to do, my will to do, my whatever it is, I'm going to conquer that thing. Again, as it is my assignment to do, I'm going to conquer it. And then that virtue is that I always want to be operating in integrity,
yeah,
because
so
you
good.
really truly only win that way. Granted, you might get some successes here or there by not fully being your true self in that, but integrity will always get you so much further. And when it comes to inspiring people, I look to equip people in their purpose, because purpose, I believe, is inside. It's just sometimes people, situations, circumstances will bring life to purpose. And so being equipped in purpose leads you to be able to empower others, because when I
Mm,
know who I am and I'm operating in the gifts of who I am, then more likely I can empower others to do the same. So that's essentially what it means to go brave. And when you look at resilience and inspiring others, that's what it is.
I love it. The Go Brave framework, I did regurgitate this into the chat so we all can get it. Growth, optimism, boldness, resilience, authenticity, victory and or virtue, and empower. I love that, the Go Brave framework. And so if you are inspired by this Go Brave framework and all that Jelisa is sharing and pouring into us, I want you to put a thumbs up or a heart, or something into the chat to let us know that you're tracking, because that is really empowering to hear you speak of how the Go Brave started with you, but then now it's really in this movement of impacting so many others. I think that's lovely. Okay, so now sometimes when we talk about a framework, right,
Yeah.
we then have to shift to the how-tos. It's one thing to inspire people just by, with the language and socializing it, but then we want to get to what are the practical things that I need to be thinking about and putting into my everyday habits to be able to go brave, right? Go brave and practice. And so, what are some practical steps that leaders can take to live courageously and aspire authenticity in others, as you've talked about it in this Go Brave framework?
Most definitely. I would for sure say, and I take this to heart, to be always learning, to never be all
Yeah,
knowing, but always learning. Because when we stop learning, we stop growing. So
absolutely.
always be willing, and in that learning, be willing to unlearn some things that we have rooted as fact or truth, to be able to process, okay, now that I'm in this lived experience at this time in my life, what do I need to unlearn and what do I need to learn to help me to navigate life better, in and of myself, but also when it comes to how I'm doing life with others.
Yeah,
Another practical way is to, and I think we all have came to this place of what it means to rest
yeah,
or not rest.
right.
I
Yeah.
am a doer, and so I like to get things done. I like to be, if I'm admittedly, I like to be busy. I'm working
Mhm.
on shifting to productive, but in that middle ground of resting, I was initially resistant to it. And I know there's a book by, I think, Trisha Hershey, called Rest is Res Resistance. Yes, Rest is Resistance. And so I resonated with that because I was challenged. I had this whole battle between my rested self and my doer self that was at
Mhm.
odds. But when I came on the other side of that, I experienced a peace like I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, okay, me taking more naps and just sleeping all day. It was literally putting my phone aside, getting
Mhm.
away from my computer, picking up a book. It was taking walks outside, enjoying nature.
Yeah.
And so I would say that that learning piece, as and also that restful piece, when it comes to practicality, but then
Yeah.
also knowing what we have. I watched another podcast that you had, and I forget who was the co-host, but you all talked about gratitude and
Yeah.
remembering what do we have, not just as to what we can leverage and what we have as far as our credentials and the things that we've learned, but who do we have? Like who
Mhm.
are we connected to, and how can we be grateful for those things that we have to then utilize them to make them better, or to make us better
Yeah.
rather. And so again,
Yeah.
that learning piece, that restful piece, and then just recognize what we have and being grateful for that.
I love that. We often don't think about gratitude as a way to allow us to really rest when we're in this mindset of having to always show up, resilient and just keep doing in spite of all that's going on around us. But I love that you brought that to the conversation because I do believe that a heart of gratitude allows us to realize that we are enough, right? Our support system is enough. We don't have to manufacture these things and outputs in order for people to see our value. And when we can see our own value through, again, that sense of gratitude because of how we've been planted and who's been planted around us, and those individuals as models, I think that it does allow us to rest a bit more. It does allow us to feel like I don't have to say yes to this additional task, because the reason I'm saying yes to it is I think it's going to give me greater credence. I think it's going to give me greater credibility, and it's going to like have somebody have a maybe a more positive perception of me. But we are enough in and of ourselves. And so that's what's coming up for me, Jelisa. And I love, love, love the gratitude aspect of what you just shared. I want to go in a little bit deeper around this resilience, aspect, because I do think it's critically important conversation that we're having right now. And can you share how your resilience programs that you offer, how they have impacted underrepresented communities? And I'll just highlight before I turn the floor over to you. I love that there is emphasis on bringing these types of programs to underrepresented communities, because those are the populations that often have the hardest with really resting, because we don't always feel whole. We don't always feel appreciated and valued. And so thank you for your leadership in that regard. But how do you help those communities through this resilience program that you offer?
It's perfect in that I ended with rest essentially, and now restarting with what rest, but that's essentially what it is, because I did a workshop called Rest and Resilience, and it's
Yes.
it's sitting in those moments of adversity and
Mm,
saying what was my responsibility and what was not my responsibility. And sometimes we take all the blame, we take all the things in
yeah.
as our own, and we try to move forward with all that baggage, but it does nothing for us. We stay
Yeah.
stuck and stagnant. So really knowing and taking ownership of really what's ours, sitting down with our support system, and whether that's a counselor, a spiritual leader, our community within our families, sitting with that support system to help you navigate through being really ready for the change
Yeah.
of getting from
Ready.
where you are to where you want to be. And like I said, I love acronyms and alliteration. So I have this ready framework I talk about in my book, Soul Work. And in order to prepare ourselves for the change that we want, especially when dealing with or experiencing resilience in, let's just say, traumatic situations that are out of our control, we have to release the old. And you talked about
Yeah.
releasing our past, also control, because a lot of times, at least for me, I will say I will have my hands in everything because I
Yes.
want to direct how things go.
Yeah.
But we can
Yeah.
only really control
Oh,
ourselves.
we
We
can.
can
Yeah.
influence others and then adapt to our environment. So releasing those things, because that leads us to a place of us being able to embrace. And like I talked about, the growth mindset, embracing that new thing. And then coming to a place of, okay, what can I affirm over my life? What can I speak life to bring me to this new place of that I'm transitioning to, and this change that I want to happen in my life? Creating a level of discipline around that, and then
Yeah.
yielding. Let me reflect on all that I've gone
Surrender.
through in that releasing and that embracing and that affirming, me developing discipline. Let me reflect and yield in that space. So those are the type of things that I help or equip underrepresented communities in when it comes to resilience, that readiness, and also being equipped in resting a little bit different than what they probably normally have been
Right.
resting as.
Yeah, if they have been resting. That's
Right.
usually the bigger question. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. And how what a tremendous gift to those who have the privilege of being able to have you help guide and support them in that way. So we are going to be shifting momentarily to get comments and questions from our audience. And so if you're here today and you have a comment or question and you would love to be able to be added to our spotlight, if you're here at part of Zoom, then I ask that you use use the raise hand feature. That lets me know that you're willing for me to add you to the spotlight and invite you to unmute yourself and engage with our guest co-host today. Or feel free just to go to the chat and let us know what's coming up for you. And we'll try to address as many of those comments and questions as best as we can. If you're on LinkedIn Live and that's how you're joining today's show, then not to worry. Go to the comment section, place your questions, your comments there. My team is watching it closely and we're bringing it over into the Zoom chat so that we can be one big community. So while you're percolating on that and thinking about what you want to contribute, I want to first let you know you're going to want to hang on to the very end because Jelisa has came here today bringing gifts, and you don't want to miss those gifts. We're going to get there in a second, but I want to start before we get into the gifts and asking about this notion of give courageously. Give courageously. We've heard give generously, but when we give courageously, I think we need to unpack that a little bit. And that's very much a part of your messaging platform. So I want you to tell us, what does that mean? And how can leaders serve from a place of abundance?
Most definitely. So when I talk about giving courageously, imagine we all often use the cup imagery or analogy when it comes to, giving from our overflow.
Yes.
And what I recognize is that a lot of times our giving is actually from the cup and not from the overflow. So let's just think of a
Mm,
12-ounce cup.
yep.
Typically, when we're giving, we're reducing our our amount of liquid, if you will, in our cup if we have water. We're reducing it to 10 because we're giving from what we have in our cup.
Yeah.
8 to 6 and so on. And part of the reason is that finding rest and replenishment, we don't know what that looks like and how to come to that place. And so we need to designate what that is for us. Take like literally taking a step away from life to some extent as much as you can, because I know parents and caregivers and sometimes you can't take that reprieve, but you need to identify what that is for you. Even if it is you
Mm,
taking a book and now, I've heard some moms, I'm not a mom myself, but like their only reprieve is going into their, washroom, closing the door, and grabbing a
yeah.
book. And
Yeah.
so if that is your replenishment to get you back to a place of overflow, then do that, because only from a place of that overflow and our courageous giving can we do so abundantly. Because
Yeah.
it's like getting on a saucer. It's like we don't have to do much work when it's from the overflow, because it just naturally comes from who we are and what we're doing. And so that giving courageously is really considering ourselves in the situation. Where are we pouring from? And then where also are we getting replenishment and refreshing? Because only from that overflow place can we do so with a strength that's not depleting.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. Give courageously. What comes to mind is, I think in order for us to be able to give courageously, we have to also get rid of the scarcity mindset and
Yes.
get rid of the mindset that we aren't deserving of, blocking off focus time on calendars, which is what I do in order to give me that moment of reprieve. I block off focus time, right? Or go to that quiet spot if we are moms. And I'm a mom too, but I have adult children, so I don't have to do that anymore. But yes, but just go to those quiet spots, whatever it is, and however that looks like for you, make it work for you, because it's just that important so that we can give from abundance, give of ourselves, our talent, our skill sets, our sound, grounded mind. From a place of abundance, because who wants you to give something from a place of scarcity? Is it going to be useful,
Right.
right?
Right.
Is it going to be useful? It's almost like, don't give me your last, right? And so I think that is so rich, and I am really taking mental note of all that you're sharing today, and I hope this audience is as well. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands right now, but I do want to go ahead and commit to what I promised, because you've referenced your book a lot today, Jelisa, and your book is Soul Work. And so I want you to talk to us a little bit about soul work and what people can expect from it, and then any other things that you would love to socialize with this community about your book. I want to turn the floor over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So soul work, disrupt self-sabotage, renew your mind, and transform your life is definitely rooted in my experience of being a chronic self-sabotager. I constantly got in my own way. I became the barrier to my success. And I strategically use disrupt because what I have found is that there is when I think of, for example, imposter syndrome, I think it's both systemic and self-inflicted. And so, and wrapping that up with also self-sabotage, I use disrupt because at varying levels as we elevate in life, we're going to find those areas that will hold us back within ourselves. Even though we think we've overcome and we've conquered, something always shows up that has us doubt and question who we are and how we're showing up in the world. So I strategically use disrupt because there are 5 things or 5 strategies I found, to include one, gratitude. To be able to, okay, let me remember who I am so that I can shift
Hmm.
my mind into moving forward. I also talk about, as I shared the acronym Ready for Change, because before we can
Hmm.
actually disrupt self-sabotage in our lives, we have to be ready to make that change. And I much rather be prepared for change because, as we know, change is inevitable. It's constant, it's universal. So there's only so much about change we can control, but to ready myself for that is going to help me to be that much more equipped as I work towards disrupting self-sabotage. And then I lean into some sustainability tools when it comes to our mindset and our vision and our values, and essentially becoming more than what we do. A lot of times we lead with
Oh,
what we do. But instead, if we show up in who we are and be really confident and courageous in that space, what we do will just flow from us, which will help us to receive the value and self-worth that we're often yearning for, that we're seeking
yes.
from other people. And then creating behaviors that really amplify that disruption of self-sabotage. So developing routines, I use something called divine creative flow, and in that I am intentional about a focus word. What is the word that I want to focus on today? And then thinking in gratitude, and then looking at it optimistically, like, what do I want to receive, experience, and know by the end of this day? And then from there, looking at either a devotional or scripture or a quote or prayer, meditating on that and kind of praying through that throughout my day. So developing routines like that that reinforce who I am so that I can strip away those doubting self-talk that goes on. So that's essentially what people will find when they get that book in their hand. Now, granted, it is faith-based, but it can be navigated by anyone, because at the end of
Hmm.
the day, it's about getting out of our own way so that we can thrive and be successful, and do life courageously.
Yeah. So, Jelisa, let me just say that I love that you're showing up today very unapologetically in your steadfastness of just communicating where your ultimate healing and help comes from. Because I also am a woman of faith, and I think that sometimes we feel like we have to shy away from communicating that about our identities out of maybe protection for others. But I'm also keenly aware that part of being able to show up in an inclusive way is allowing people to be authentic. Doesn't mean that someone has to subscribe something for their life, but if that is really what grounds you, then yes, I want you to lean into that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as another woman of faith. And soul work. So first and foremost, we have shared into the chat the gift that I was talking about. It is a link for you to be able to access a free download of Courageous Change Questions and the first chapter of the book Soul Work. And so be sure that you're capturing that link for the gift. And Jelisa, we thank you for it. Thank you for your generous giving today. We do appreciate that. I would comment on a couple things that you said as you were talking about what people can expect from the book. So the first is you mentioned disrupt. It requires being ready for change. That is change management 101. You know, a lot of times we talk about leadership, equity, inclusion, all those things. And in order for you to get critical mass people to align with that, that vision and, understand the purpose for us, so they aren't fighting the system. That is being disruptive. We have to make sure that we're readying people for change. And so that includes even in our personal lives when we are trying to ready ourselves for change. And so I love the parallels there and that you do speak of that in your book. I think that's lovely. I also love this idea of divine creative flow. And I think about how many people at the start of the year, they'll think about what is your word for the year? And they'll communicate it out and they'll talk about why. I was one of those individuals. Not every year do I feel really led to identify a word. This year I did, and I talked about it. And I saw many people did that. What I love that you have done is let's not make this kind of something that we do at the beginning of the year. And then maybe we come back to it every so often, but let's make this daily. Maybe what I need on this day is not that one word that is to be the overarching theme of the year, but what do I need for this day? And so I'm now going to adopt this divine creative flow strategy. And it's not just going to be leaning into my word for the year, the way that I feel like it was delivered to me, but I am also going to identify what are the words or the phrases for the day that can carry me through that moment. For those of us who are believers, we often pray for give us our daily bread. And so that's what it reminds me of. What is my
Yeah.
daily bread today? And be really excited about leaning into that. And then the last thing is that you talked about self-sabotage. And I would love for you to, with whatever way you feel comfortable, help us to understand what your healing journey was, because you speak
Mhm.
so confidently now. And maybe your book uncovers this, and I cannot wait to get the entire book. I want to support you. I want to get the book because it sounds like something that would be really useful. But I want to understand what was the healing process and the journey for you to get to a place when you knew that you were very much a person of self-sabotage to where you are now, showing up with so much light, with so much wisdom, with so much inspiration. I think that would be really important for our community. And then I do see a question in the chat that I'll get to momentarily. So thank you, Jelisa. Go ahead and share for us.
Okay. Wow, self-sabotage was a part of my DNA, I felt like, for a good majority of my life because I was so caught up in seeking validation and wanting to be affirmed, which I think is real for a lot of people, but I wasn't
Yeah.
seeking it from the right source, if you will. And with that, I went to what was obvious for me to get that validation. That was going to school, getting a degree. I was first in my
Yeah.
family to get a degree. So first generation college student, raised by a single parent, the eldest of all my siblings. So I had a lot to live up to. And so I piled on all of these accolades and all of these accomplishments, and I hid behind them. Like,
Mm,
truth be told, it has been a journey for me to be really real with how I show up in the world. And I'm still working through that because a lot of people that know me will say, oh, yeah, she's a teacher, very cerebral, very, because I love to share information. But speaking of you mentioning your word for the year, for the past 2 years, my word, if you will, has been implementation. Because I
mm,
can be the creative, I can make the things and I
right.
can share the things, but the implementation process sometimes it is a challenge for me because I have this fear, which is the self-sabotaging part of it failing and it being successful, and they clash. And so that's what self-sabotage was like for me, to the point to where, as I speak to in my book, self-sabotage is really our body and what we innately or naturally desire, our soul, which encompasses our mind, will, and emotions, in conflict with our spirit, what's connected
Mm-hmm.
to truth. And so when those things clash, that's when self-sabotage comes into play. But it's not until we get into alignment with all of those to where everything flows that we can push past at least the disrupting of self-sabotage in the season that we're in before, of course,
Yeah.
something else comes into our life.
Yes, yes,
And
yes. No, I
so
love that you put
that's
that
my
caveat on the
journey.
end. I
Yes.
love that you put that caveat on the end because we have to realize this is a process. It is a journey. Just because we've gotten over the hurdle of self-sabotage in one particular instance does not mean that those sentiments cannot return. And so we have to continue to practice and use our tools and the strategies and exercise those muscles. And so that's beautiful. So here's a question from one of our participants that are joining us today from LinkedIn Live. Thank you for being here. And the question is this: in a world that encourages and even celebrates the loudest, the biggest, the fastest, what encouragement would you offer us, quieter souls, I love this, who enjoy taking our time and being intentional with moves and decisions we make?
Keep doing it, because you're going to be rested when stuff really gets real.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah. Your
think
pace is your pace.
yes, yes. And I think, because I was watching social media and how like the narrative start to shift. It was like finish strong 2024. And then shifting into, okay, be intentional and be soft. And we need to have an equal balance of both. But
Yeah.
for this particular contributor, I would say stay, as you mentioned, Dr. Nika, in the pace that you're in, because when those big, loud, and more and excess get tired, because they will get winded, you'll be right in position to be able to keep the movement going, to be able to keep the
Yes.
stride forward. And so I would just, because everybody has something great to contribute to the world, it's just making sure that we show up in the fullness of ourselves so that it could be um, encouraged and applauded and
Hmm.
accepted and appreciated.
Yeah, I do love the shift that I'm seeing in normalizing both of, if for those who are extroverts and that's how they show up as, big personalities, and that's great. It's nothing to take away from those individuals. But I think that generally speaking, our society has favored those individuals. It's almost like the squeakiest wheel gets the most attention, right? And so I love that there has been a shift to normalize that those with those quiet souls and quiet spirits are just as courageous. They're just as competent. They're just as worthy and deserving of all the opportunities. And I remember a couple episodes ago, I talked about how I think we may have been addressing the same topic just of courage, but I talked about how courage doesn't always roar. We think about courage as a big lion. And what came to mind was because I know what it was. We were celebrating Rosa Parks Day. And we talked about how Rosa Parks, how she didn't fuss, she didn't fight, she didn't kick, she didn't scream. But my, what an impact that she had on society when she just sat there in her quiet soul and her quiet spirit, right? I have chill bumps, but that's but that I think speaks to our need to shift from we have to show up loud and big and boisterous and be so fast to get to the finish line in order for us to have impact. And so I thank you for that question, our LinkedIn live participant, and appreciate you being here today. Okay, so I'm watching for questions. We do have some more time for questions, so make sure you're getting those in. While we wait, though, I'm going to maximize these 8 minutes. I also want to talk about some other resources that you have for this community. And one in particular is a resource guide to emotionally intelligent allyship. So talk to us about that. And then we're going to place some info into the chat for this community to be gifted by your generosity. So talk to us about that.
Most definitely. And so this particular resource, I noticed when dealing with people and in community, a lot of times we forget how who we are shows up in connection and can fuel our capacity for relationship. And
Yeah.
when we are looking at that process, it helps us to be better allies. So I facilitated a workshop with a local a health agency from privilege to partnership, and looking
Mhm.
at our humanity. What we all can relate to is our emotions. Those things
Yes,
we're all connected with. Now, granted, there are some social things, cultural, that we can find connection because we all are intersexual beings. But one thing
absolutely.
is for sure is or are our emotions. And so when we look at that in a mirror, or not necessarily a mirror, but when we look at that through a window of power and privilege, it's examining what can I add or advocate for another person to have a leveled up experience because their natural privilege is demeaned or dampered or downplayed. And then vice versa, that plus and minus aspect of privilege. And that's really
Yeah.
what equals or equates to belonging. Again, looking at our humanity, how we show up in the world and our commonalities, that plus and minus of privilege, that equates the belonging that we're able to experience in the workplace, in our communities, and so on. And so I tie that into allyship because we can use our privilege in that allyship space to plus and or minus to help or build up each other along the way. And so I think it's a resource that I love to share with people. And it's a quick read. It's an ebook, so something that people can kind of skim through. And there are some practical strategies and some case studies that people can read through to see how to apply some of those instances that are shared.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And so I'm looking into the chat and I see that we have shared twice now your free download of the Courageous Change questions, as well as the first chapter of your book, Soul Work. But I believe that we also have a special offering for the EI guide to allyship. And so I'm going to ask my team to make sure that they find that information and try to place that into the chat as well. I love the labeling of privilege to partnership because it says so much. In fact, I think that allyship, being accomplices, all of that has started to evolve to a place to where maybe people were thinking, perhaps it doesn't fully express really what we want. But I will say, when we think about from privilege to partnership, it does make it even more clear that for those of us who have areas of power and privilege in our lives, and this is not just a respecter of one particular category of people, we all probably can look over our lives and identify where do we have a source of power and privilege, and how can we use it, acknowledge it first, and then use it honorably to be able to help someone else along the way. And that is, in essence, what I'm hearing you refer to, this privilege to partnership idea, and that how do we let that also fuel and deepen our empathy and our emotions and our care and our concern for others to bridge that divide. And that is just beautiful. That's how we're going to be able to help share power to where it's in reach for everybody, because we all are deserving of thriving in society. And so I love that you have such a guide that's available for people to help facilitate what that looks like in action. Okay, and so yes, I'm seeing it now. Thank you, Jelisa. You just shared it into the chat. So pay attention to the chat. You have another gift that's there for you, another tool, another resource. We love tools and resources here. So we're grateful. We're grateful. Very much so. We're grateful. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left, and we probably could go on and on, Jelisa. But I want to be strategic about our 3 minutes, and I want to give you an opportunity to close us out in a way that feels really important for you, because while we've talked about a lot, and again, we're so grateful for your time, I'm sure that there's more information maybe that you're holding and that you have a lot of energy around that you may want to leave with this community. And maybe there are upcoming projects, I don't know, but I want to give you that space and that time. So before I turn it over, though, I want to thank this community, this podcast community. You all have shown up today as you do every single week. We don't take that for granted. If this has been valuable to you, I want you to share this out with someone else in your network. You can catch the replay. Of course, you can catch the content that's going to be available in podcast capacity. But let's just keep this community to this small knit group. We want to make sure that we're getting the word out and really capturing the masses. And so with that in mind, thank you for being here today. So Jelisa, I want to turn it over for you to share with us, what have we not talked about that you have some energy and you want to socialize?
Yes, of course. One thing that I often leave with those who I connect with or that I'm working with, I started a YouTube channel where I'm talking about unwrapping courage, and I did like 25 days of what I like to call soul work. So I delved into at least that first chapter. So if you're in need of some more insight and understanding about that space, you can go there for that. But I would end each episode with, and I do this also in my email correspondence, is to remember to let your soul work be your best work to a better you. And with that, I'm sure it's going to help you to live, love, and lead courageously. And so I usually try to incorporate that in every aspect that I'm sharing. As far as new and innovative things, I'm always because I'm a creative. I'm always coming up with new things. And so I do a different series of free workshops just around that
Mm.
Go Brave framework, as well as some of the different initiatives that I have going on. So when you download those two options, you'll be kind of opted into our email list so you can see what is happening with Go Brave. And I would love for you to be a part of that community.
Fantastic. On that note, we are so grateful. We're going to drop your LinkedIn information. Of course, we do have the YouTube that you just referenced into the chat. Certainly make sure that you're connecting with Jelisa and leveraging all of these great resources that she's providing and talking about with us today. And I don't want us to forget the beautiful words that you just spoke when you said, let your soul work be your best work. On that note, have a great, safe weekend. Look forward to seeing you all back here next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast as part of our 5th year anniversary. Thanks so very much for joining us today.